Good morning, and thank you so much for the privilege of being here to describe a process we've learned that helps communities end and prevent homelessness, not by spending more money or adding specialty programs, but by learning to work together differently, by working collaboratively. And I have to say, it is very special for me to be here because over 100 years ago, as Joe mentioned, my ancestors, my great-grandparents, left Donegal for America. And like so many Irish throughout history who were uprooted from their homes by dire economic circumstances, my great-grandparents had to rely on the help of strangers to establish a new life in the Boston area. And as we Irish know better than most, the experience of homelessness through our family stories, we know that generations of us have survived because of networks of other Irish who helped us find jobs and places to live and extended friendship at times we were seeking new homes. So I think it's a very interesting and important backdrop to describing this process that we've come upon, because that process that so many of our family experienced of relying on mutual aid and of collaborative community supports, I think the time has come to revive that, because while so many good organizations and well-intentioned government bodies have come to take the place of that mutual aid and collective community responsibility, we've gone in the direction, and Madeline described this, of specialized services. And we now have specialty programs for emergency accommodation, for housing support, for training, for job placement, for the range of things that a person or family in crisis would need. And again, these are all good things, these services, the intentions behind them are wonderful, and the care with which this work is done is often exemplary. Yet there's a problem, because individuals and families in crisis often need more than one thing. And they need more than just housing or just a job to put their lives back on track after a crisis. They often need housing, a job, help with health issues, help with their children, help with school, help with addictions, and yet our services are not designed to work collaboratively. And so we find ourselves in a place where services are designed for single problems, while the most vulnerable among us, those that I'm describing who are in transition, who have challenges on many fronts, they have complex problems that require multidimensional solutions. And so in speaking today about what ends and prevents homelessness, I actually could be speaking about any complex human situation where those in trouble require more than one thing. And thus I hope you take two messages away from my remarks. One, that Ireland can end homelessness. And two, that complex multi-layered problems require multidimensional collaborative solutions, and that effective structures are emerging to enable this collaborative problem solving. And I'm going to be intensely practical in my remarks because I really believe we have no time to waste in theorizing on these issues. People's lives are literally at stake. And so I'm going to share our experience of changing the way we work, we organizationally, and we as a growing group of people in this field in the United States, to become more effective by becoming more collaborative. And I'm going to illustrate a learning process that we've gone through organizationally ourselves, because this journey to transform our way of working can be painful. It involves us giving up treasured notions about our organizational identities sometimes, gives us pause about moving out of our comfort zone and our ways of working traditionally. But the payoff is, frankly, doing better work that makes a greater impact in the lives of people who need our help. And to set the stage, in the United States, at any given moment, we have 650,000 people who are homeless. That includes members of families. And over the course of a year, it's from 1.5 million to 2 million people. But importantly, what we've learned by really becoming ferociously focused on data is that about 127,000 of that larger number are individuals who remain trapped in homelessness for years. Thank God, the most frequent experience of homelessness is about 30 days. For most, it's an emergency condition that typical supports and help in the community can help to resolve. But there is that group, and it's the group with the most serious and complex challenges who need not just a home, but mental health care or help with addictions or help with health issues. That's the group that sort of sinks to the bottom, and that we have failed consistently in the United States and sadly in most developed nations to really pay close attention to. And so our work has evolved to really be about rallying the nation to end chronic homelessness, to focus on the hardest to serve, those who've been in this downward spiral the longest, and in fact, who are, in addition to being the most vulnerable to actually dying on the streets of our country, are actually costing the most to public institutions. These are individuals, as they remain homeless, who are in and out of hospitals, in and out of jails, in and out of drug treatment. And so we are faced with the irrefutable evidence that doing the right thing morally and humanly is actually doing the smart thing economically. For us organizationally, I'll just give you our backstory. I started one not-for-profit, Common Ground, back in 1990 to build housing for the homeless, and we built about 3,000 apartments in and around New York City. But we stepped back at a certain moment once we had built about 1,500 units of housing in Manhattan and realized something deeply uncomfortable. That is, wonderful as the buildings were, and they were successful, and people were not returning to homelessness, and they were restoring landmark properties that made the neighbors happy and added value to the community property owners, we were still passing the same people that we had seen living on the streets in Manhattan before we opened our first apartment. So we had been diligent in seeking applications from shelters and other emergency accommodations in and around New York City. But we had not actually reached the people who had in many ways inspired us to do this work, the people who were living on the street. And so despite our having a profound impact on many people's lives, we had not made a dent in the urgent problem that was literally looking us in the face every day. And so for a while, we blamed the homeless for not being willing to move off the street and into our buildings. We were, in fact, told by street outreach workers that were employed by other NGOs that those on the street were, the term they used was service resistant. Well, finally, we actually asked the people on the street themselves why they were there and not making their way into our housing. And what we learned actually stunned us in the best, most humbling way. We learned that they had never been offered the chance. All of these outreach workers funded, good organizations funded by many millions of government dollars over many years, were trained to connect the homeless on the street with emergency accommodation, not to offer them help in finding a home. Every single one of those individuals had had some kind of frightening experience at a shelter in New York City and didn't want to go back there. But because they were outside the official system and not following the rules, they were just literally left to die on the street. They weren't even acknowledged to be homeless because they didn't have an official homeless number. And yet they were the people we saw and passed every day. So we learned a hard lesson there, that even if help in finding a home was everyone's intention, that our own regulations and other kind of crazy kind of organizational barriers often stood in the way of life-saving processes. And frankly, even if we got through those rules and the processes, we realized that it required almost a year of effort to move a single person off the street, if it could be accomplished at all. So because these individuals were frankly known to everyone, the cops in the neighborhood, the business people, we all knew them, we concluded that any kind of work that we needed to do to change this reality ought to draw on the information that all of our neighbors had, as well as our own expertise. And we looked at as a first step, our own barriers as an organization running housing. And one that we had created that was absolutely arbitrary, we realized, was that we required a 6-month period of sobriety before someone could move into our building. And so what that meant is that many of the people who needed our help the most could not meet that criteria and were therefore blocked from services. It was the beginning of a series of confrontations with uncomfortable truths about the way we were working, and that even as we moved toward collaboration and in examining the rules that governed our businesses, that the weight of all of these kind of silos, rules, and practices that had gone unexamined had made all of us in the helping field a big part of the problem. And so we came to this moment of realizing we had a choice to make, that we could keep doing good work. I mean, all the while we were housing people who'd been homeless, and it was a wonderful environment for them and connecting them with health and mental health and employment support. We could keep going that way, or we could follow the line of this new series of discoveries about those that we were leaving out. And what we decided to do, and it was not an easy decision because it really required making quite a leap, is that a whole group of us left the organization we'd founded to start a new organization, Community Solutions, really to explore what would be required to work differently and to really make, as Madeline said, our customer the person who was not getting service and who was living on the street. And so at the heart of this effort in our new organization was learning to create and manage multi-stakeholder collaboratives, to actually tear down the bureaucratic barriers and to question the really oppressive and contradictory rules that got in the way of our assisting people, and also to take what we were learning and intentionally from day one to spread this set of practices we were creating and to use the theory of around the diffusion of innovation that actually looks at a change process of any type in any system, of involving at least 5 different sets of actors: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And I'm going to describe each of these terms and illustrate it as I talk about our process for both learning how to work collaboratively and actually spreading this learning as we ourselves were experiencing it back in New York City. So what we discovered first when we committed ourselves to breaking through these barriers that were keeping people from moving off the street was that we had to first organize a team of actors, which included housing providers, the city of New York that controlled many of the resources. We needed people working in the mental health field. We needed to organize the churches locally to actually support us in helping bring people to appointments and waiting to get people through these complicated bureaucracies. So we had this kind of huge team guided by, interestingly, a person I hired who was completely outside our sector. I thought for a bit about hiring a very experienced social worker who'd been working for years with the homeless and realized that might actually not get us the radical change we needed. So I ended up hiring a military intelligence officer who came right in with a whole set of skills around mapping the ground truth, what's actually happening here. And under her leadership and the team that we formed around her, we realized that step 1 would always be organizing the multi-stakeholder team, clarifying the goal, and actually knowing person by person who we needed to focus on, and also knowing what the community resources were, really taking a new approach to inventorying resources, not looking at maybe the narrow bucket of housing for the homeless that existed and was funded in New York City, but stepping back and saying, we're surrounded by housing. Why can't we get some of that and that and that? And also, who are the other people in the community who would have a stake, a natural stake in finding good solutions? Hospitals who were spending a fortune and had people in and out of emergency rooms. The police who didn't want to be arresting people whose only crime was being homeless. We got all of these people who had nowhere to go with their frustrations about the way they were working to actually join our team. And we also realized that we had to make really dignified, respectful offers of housing. that each one of these individuals needed to be able to exercise some personal choice in the decision. And so we had to be responsive to not just, here's what we got for you, but what would make you feel at home? And then we had to put systems in place that would allow people to succeed in their homes once they were there, to connect them to their new neighborhood, to the places they lived, and to the services they would need. So we, in sort of rapid order, it seemed to have gone by in a flash, although it was a bit of a slow start. Within 2 years, we had, in the 20 blocks of Midtown Manhattan, found that while there were about 55 people who were on the street consistently, only 18 of them were there every single day. And we learned that by going out early in the morning, not 9 to 5 hours. Really hard to tell who's homeless there. We started going out from 4 to 6 a.m. and realized that there was this very distinct pattern of a small cohort of individuals, about 18, who were there all the time, and just instinctively started working with those individuals who'd been homeless on average over 10 years. And as we got the first group into housing, something quite amazing happened. It was as though homelessness itself just vanished. It took 2 years, but we went from 55 people living on the streets regularly to 7. And it was as people moved into housing, that group of 18, it's as though some kind of environmental signal was sent, which is actually, maybe we should not be homeless here. Maybe we should be using the city's emergency services. And it wasn't just that 20-block area where we saw an 87% reduction in 2 years. We saw a 43% reduction in all of Midtown Manhattan by organizing the resources and really changing the mindset that it's not about handing out sandwiches anymore. It's about getting vulnerable people into housing. It took a couple of years, but the city of New York then recontracted all those outreach services and really changed what it meant to do outreach to the homeless to be about getting people into housing. And so that process, as we were doing it, we were reaching out to other people in other cities who were, we knew to be innovators and doing good work there and helping people make the transition from the streets to home. And we had this informal learning group of about 19 cities. We were doing our thing in New York. We were learning things from Denver and from Atlanta and from Minnesota, a few cities there. And what we realized after a few years of all of us seeing success was that we were really onto something, and that this set of collaborations that we were forming locally and this collaboration we were forming across cities nationally actually offered something very, very kind of revolutionary, not just for our cause of homelessness, but as a new way of working in our sector. And so we decided we would take on, as a community, this core group of vanguard cities, the whole question of why in a wealthy, powerful country like the United States do we allow 127,000 people to remain homeless for years. And so we initiated something 2 years ago in July called the 100,000 Homes Campaign. And our goal is nothing short of changing the way we approach homelessness in the United States and ending this scandal of long-term homelessness. And so we've gone about it by first targeting the 55 cities that account for over 65% of homelessness in the United States. And what we, within that, have done is to really break down the process by this diffusion of innovation concept, and to very relentlessly identify in each city, who are the ones we can count on as the innovators, and who else do we need to bring along using a different strategy. And so I'll tell you how the process works on the ground. It begins with a registry week. We train cities together, cohorts of cities together. And to date, 70 cities now have completed a registry week, which involves mobilizing community volunteers, well over 100 in most communities, to canvass the streets of their community over the course of 3 days, from 4 to 6 a.m., to create a public health registry, a by-name prioritized list of everyone who's homeless. It's prioritized based on health vulnerabilities, and we use public health tools to actually query people about whether they have one of 8 health conditions that correlates to early mortality. We call this the Vulnerability Index, and now nationally over 35,000 homeless people have been surveyed, and there's a remarkable consistency from city to city about the health conditions of the homeless age. It's really quite shocking what we're learning and how this data resource that my organization manages for the country has really given a whole new picture to the country of what we're looking at. And we're looking at an urgent public health crisis, not a criminal justice or a nuisance problem. And we've realized, based on just these 35,000 surveys alone, that there's a higher mortality rate for the homeless than there is for cancer victims. And so we're beginning to change attitudes about really what the nature of the problem is. And to just illustrate using one city, for instance, in San Diego, California, that began their process about 2 years ago. They had 270 volunteers come out from not-for-profits, the business community, the faith groups. Everyone had a role. And so what we have done is, after identifying the early, the innovators, we have looked for the groups that we'll call the early adopters, the groups that maybe they don't start with having the great ideas themselves, but they're the ones who are willing to give something a try. And they need help in creating the conditions that unleash their kind of creativity and their willingness to act. And so our primary objective throughout the campaign, and our goal is to have 100,000 of these 127,000 people housed by July 2014. And we use the early adopter communities to really be the ones to demonstrate the evidence, working with innovators about what techniques really get the job done. And so as we get results, and we've created all sorts of collaborative training opportunities to help people improve their process, to help them once they've identified those who've been homeless the longest, to take the process down from sometimes a year in their cities to a gold standard objective of 30 days, of getting people into housing in 30 days. Now, we've seen thus far communities go from like 260 days to 40 days. We haven't gotten to 30 days in any but one city yet, but we know it's possible. But what we also do then is take that evidence and show it to other cities who are curious in order to get them to try it out. That's the early majority group. Thus far, we're now up to 146 cities in the United States, plus 5 in Australia and 2 in Canada. And what we've been able to accomplish thus far with the early majority group, and we haven't even touched the group that needs the rules rewritten for them, which we'll call the late majority. But what we've been able to accomplish is over 19,000 people housed in the last 2 years from a standing start. And we are on track mathematically to get to this 100,000 persons housed goal. And one of the things that we've learned to do is to also be very strategic about what we'll call the laggards, the group that just will sit there and complain and think of reasons not to change. We spend a lot of time with these folks early on and have made the decision to ignore them and to just keep going and to show that these results can change lives, can save communities money, and can actually show new ways of bringing together landlords, churches, government, mental health providers, providers of all kinds of social services to actually be more effective and reach those for whom, until recently, we thought there was no hope. So I'm sorry that I'm going to not be able to show you a wonderful little video. Maybe you can find it off by the side today. But there's nothing like the power of showing picture from community after community throughout the United States now of people who are living on the streets and now in their new homes. And the physical transformation that is so evident when you see that not just change in these individuals' lives is possible, but change in our own attitudes. Thank you.